An NFL draft expert joins the show to rave about the Colts 2023 draft class. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You all for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on today to get started. I'm Zach Hicks, not joined by Jake Arthur today, but you guys still know and love me, obviously, from this podcast here, Locked On Colts. You know me also from horseshoehuddle.com, where I am the random adjective film analyst there. You know, Jake always loves to throw a little bit of flavor on top of that, but nefarious, notorious, whatever. I'm the film guy at horseshoehuddle.com. Jake is a credentialed Colts member of the site and of our beautiful podcast. Today, though, I'm joined by Ian Cummings, the NFL draft analyst over at the Pro Football Network. I was looking at his stuff today, and well over 1,000 articles to his name over there at the Pro Football Network. I mean, Ian, before we get into this draft talk, man, 1,000 articles, you got to calm down just a little bit. Like, you got to chill out over there.
I know, dude. I swear. Sometimes I look back. I'm like, wait a second. I wrote that much. Like, oh my god, it piles up, man. You don't really have time to sit back and look, man. But it's been fun. Started out there as an editor a few years ago, and then ended up writing an emergency draft piece about Chase Young because he was declaring it. So we got to get this out. And it's like, hey, maybe you should write a little bit more. And it's all kind of cascaded to where it is now. So it's been fun. This cycle especially was very fun. I feel like a lot of twists and turns all the way to the very end. I'm just glad we have results to go back on, man, because I wrote way too many mock drafts. The guy at the point where I'm like, I need to mix it up, deliberately mix it up, just so I'm not repeating. It's like, but it's fun. We live for it every cycle. It's the grind. I'm gonna try and I was telling you before the call, gotta try and decompress a little bit before we get on to 2024. But it's a fun time always.
Yeah, for sure. So we're talking NFL draft class. We're obviously talking Indianapolis Colts 2023 NFL draft class, and we really can't talk about this class without saying Anthony Richardson. Like, we have to spend time on Anthony Richardson. I know there were a few people in media that were lower on Anthony Richardson compared to the majority and stuff like that. I think Kuiper had him as like QB4. There were other people who had him QB4, 5, 6, whatever, and stuff like that. Ian, I know you were one of those people who viewed him as a top 10 pick in this class, someone who believed in those traits. So Anthony Richardson, 4th overall to Indianapolis Colts. What do you think about that pick?
Yeah, I love it. I think that was one. If there was one coach QB fit that I wanted to manifest, it was Richardson to Shane Steichen. I think that's a phenomenal fit. I think you look at what Steichen did with Jalen Hurts, a tools-rich quarterback who, even he doesn't have nearly the tools that Richardson does. That's the exciting part, right? So, but hey, he's a viable running threat, enough arm talent, and he was able to build an offense around him and really create a productive attack, right? So, I look at that, scheming him in the right ways. I think that he can do that for Richardson too. I think if there's any situation where he was going to land and that's going to be right for him, it was the Colts. I think, and the tools just pop out to me. That's one reason. That's what lifted him up. But I think anytime you have a quarterback with the tools that Richardson has, right, the question that you always ask next is, does he show enough promise on the operational side for me to invest in that? Because we've seen quarterbacks very tools rich before not work out. So does he have the necessary foundation beyond that too? I mean, the tools are, you don't even have to say, you don't even have to speak on that. We know it's there on the tape, but beyond that too, the pocket navigation that he has, the feel to extend plays in the pocket, evade rushers habitually, instinctively, and keep his eyes up too, the flashes of anticipation over the middle of the field, right? He's shown that he can process the field. It's just a matter of, accuracy. Sometimes, his mechanics can be a little out of sync at times, but I think more work with a QB trainer, and we know he's been progressing there as well. You go back to the combine, he looked pretty crisp there. So, I think he's trending up. He's still very young, and then the tools are, it's viable to say that we haven't seen a quarterback with this kind of ceiling, right? So if you have an opportunity to take a guy like that, you got to invest in it if you have the proper infrastructure. And I think the Colts definitely do.
Right. So I did want to ask you, because obviously everyone here following me knows exactly my thoughts on this quarterback. Anthony Richardson has been my guy, my QB1 throughout the whole process, the guy where I'm willing to bet the house on. But for you as a draft analyst, you've been doing this for years. You've been comparing guys like Anthony Richardson to much cleaner prospects like Bryce Young and CJ Stroud. And again, when you look at that completion percentage and you look at the experience, it is so rare. Like, it's hard to really compare Anthony Richardson even to a Josh Allen type, because Josh Allen started multiple seasons. We have one season of Anthony Richardson. So with that, I know you kind of touched on it in your first answer there, but how did you feel comfortable projecting this guy as a top 10 pick when we really just didn't have like any film on him?
Yeah, and that's the tough part. I think, just as that is a source of uncertainty, it can also be a source for excitement. He only has 1 year as a starter, right? So it's still very early in his developmental track. I would be a lot more concerned if we had 2 years and he hadn't shown progression, right? Or maybe he had 1 year where he showed promise, another where he regressed, right? So on one hand, you'd like to have a larger sample size to go off of, but you're seeing a guy who, has so little experience, and you like to think, let's get him into the NFL right away. Let's get him with that NFL supporting cast and those coaching, and we might be able to really expedite this process. So I look at that, doesn't have very much tape, doesn't have very much wear on his tires, but, I feel like there's an opportunity here to really take it to the next step. So I think that was part of it for me. That wasn't the whole thing, because that's more of a conceptual one. Like, it's just kind of like saying there's not a lot to go off of, but looking at the film, and looking for those little operational instances where it's like, all right, he does have the capacity to go off of. I look back to, last cycle, a lot of people early on in this cycle were maybe comparing Richardson to Malik Willis, because, similar archetype there, you think, with the creation capacity, the arm talent for sure. But Malik Willis was a guy who started multiple years, and even going back to that final tape that he had, the field vision was not there. A lot of times, with the creation capacity, he definitely had that, the short area athleticism, the explosiveness. He's a rocked up runner for sure. But, a lot of times he was getting into those chaotic situations because he couldn't process adequately in the pocket, right? And because he was, waiting too long, right? And not seeing windows. So, with Richardson, yeah, there's some inconsistency there, but you do see the proper field vision, the processing, and I do think, you have one of the highest drop rates among quarterbacks too. So I think, the accuracy, people like to point to the completion percentage. That is one of the rougher areas of his game. I also don't think it's nearly as bad or as detrimental. He definitely needs to improve, but I don't think it's going to be a liability early on. I think it's more, he needs to keep honing that skill. And then another thing too, a lot of people talk about athleticism and arm talent as ceiling traits too, but that can raise his floor. I think there's a viable path where if you're Steichen, you can build an offense around that early on while he's still growing as a passer, because he can make you miss with his agility. He can explode into space too. And if you try to tackle him one-on-one, odds are you're not going to be able to. I mean, the guy is just an elite running threat. It's very hard to stop that. And you can build an offense around that. You can create a tug of war for that defense between the run and then his explosive arm. I think there's a lot of ways to use it early on and down the line when he develops as a passer. So I think that ability alone opens up so many avenues for you.
Yeah, for sure. I'm excited to see him in this offense with Shane Steichen. And I really think a lot of what those two are going to be able to do, like, again, we've said a lot on this podcast, you need an alien to compete in this league nowadays, because all these quarterbacks are just aliens. Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson.
Especially in the AFC, that's where they all are.
Especially in the AFC. And I think in this draft class, the only one who I think can really get to that alien level is the Greek god prospect in Anthony Richardson, the one that they just took there. Coming up, guys, we're going to talk about non-Anthony Richardson draft picks that the Colts made. But first, make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers can get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. I don't know about you guys, but I'm kind of liking the Miami Heat. You could have made a lot of money betting on them earlier in the playoffs, but now with the East wide open, I'm thinking about putting some money down the Miami Heat, and there's no better place to put all that money down on playoff action than America's #1 sports book at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/locked-on. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. And everydayers, don't worry, we'll be back bright and early with you guys tomorrow to keep talking about Anthony Richardson and the Indianapolis Colts. We're done with Anthony Richardson for today, but don't worry, tomorrow I'll have a special guest, Fran Duffy from the Philadelphia Eagles.com site, a phenomenal analyst, a legend in my eyes. We'll have him on tomorrow to talk all Anthony Richardson. So if you guys want a full episode of just Anthony Richardson, that's going to be tomorrow morning, so set your alarms. We love you everydayers, and we're going to bring that really cool content to you. All right, but Ian, we have you today. We don't have Fran Duffy yet. We don't want to look too far ahead, and I'm very happy to have you here as well, Ian. I'm not trying to look ahead to the future, we're talking other draft picks here besides Anthony Richardson now. And the Colts made a ton of picks, a lot of value picks where some people were saying this guy that the Colts got in round 3 or round 4 should have been in the top 50. This guy they got in round 5 should have been maybe in the top 50. So of their day 2 or even day 3 picks, what was kind of your favorite addition to this Colts team?
Yeah, well, I think all the cornerbacks, they drafted 3 corners, if I remember correctly, and I was a big
Yeah,
fan of all of them. I mean, Julius Brents, first off, he was the one we expected to go where he did, right? I mean,
right.
explosive, super high energy, twitchy athlete, but then an albatross with his 34-inch arms, incredibly physical, both in press and in run support. I mean, he can lay the wood coming downhill, a little uncontrolled with his technique at times. I think that's where he stands to improve. But again, you're working with a very, very complete palette of traits with him, and I think that's super exciting. They got Darius Rush from South Carolina as well, who I'm very high on as well. He was just outside my top 50. And I think they got him in round 4. So I was a big fan of his. I think
Round
5.
five.
Oh my
Round
God,
5.
dude. I
Yeah.
forgot. I knew a lot of corners fell, man. I didn't know he fell that far. But yeah, Darius Rush, man, he's another one who I got his RAS up right here. But I know the 6'2", 198, almost 34-inch arms again, too. But then he ran a 4.36, 4.38, somewhere in that range, too. So he's got legitimate speed down the field to blanket guys. Incredibly fluid for his size. Some of the routes that he was running against at the Senior Bowl, I mean, he's snapping his hips down right away and decelerating with just 3 steps. I mean, so super amped up, flexible, but incredible reaction to stimulus too. So, and then he's a former wide receiver, so he's got really good ball skills as well. So I think he could be a very good value deal. And then they got Jalen Jones around 7, if I remember correctly, too.
Yep, round
I was
7.
I was a fan of him too, man. I mean, coming out, I think he can improve as a playmaker, right? I think the production at the catch point is still there's still room to improve there, but again, he's 6'2", 200, very strong frame for his size, lean, compact. But I think, a lot of times guys just weren't thrown his way. I think he's one of those guys who, again, he didn't run very fast. I think he ran like a 4.57, but he had a 6'8" something 3 cone. And that shows up. I mean, he's got very good short area agility, corrective athleticism for his size, and actually pretty good discipline in his technique for his age. He can use his feet first. He can match guys off the line, use his length to direct. So, I thought I expected him to go a lot earlier too. So getting him around 7, you do have a little clutter in that CB room now, but that's never a bad thing. I mean, especially for the Colts who have, a lot of guys up for contracts in next year. So, I think that was a great trio. And then you gotta bring up Adebamiwa Adebawore in round 4 too, man. That was a guy that I wanted to go very early. I think his versatility that he provides, right? I mean, and I know Tony Pauling tweeted that, some teams passed on him because they didn't quite know where to play him, right? But I think that's the benefit with him is that he really can play wherever you want, right? I think, he can still refine his hand usage. He's still, for the most part, traits rich right now. He's not super disciplined all the time. Sometimes he'll overshoot plays and run defense when he should just hold the line. But, I do think he has the traits to be that 3-down defender who you can put a 5-tech on early downs to hold the line. He's got the strength, the leverage, the length. But then on, later downs too, alongside Grover Stewart, man, put him at 3-tech, and this guy can plow open lanes with that 6'2", 282, 4.49 speed, 34-inch arms. This guy's a build a 3-tech, man. So I love that upside. I love the versatility, the flexibility that he provides. And I think getting him around 4 is a phenomenal value pick. And then even other guys like, Blake Freeland, that was a round where I would have taken him round 4.
Yep.
So I think they got the right value there. But another guy who's very traits rich, again, I think at his height, pad level, flexibility, those will be issues for him. But I do think, again, 37-inch vertical, you can't teach that. Explosive, incredibly powerful. I think they really, where they needed to swing for the fences, they swung for the fences. They got great value. I was a big fan of their entire class.
Yeah, and I told you guys at the top of this draft, Ian was coming on just to rave about this Colts draft, and he just went for like 4 minutes there, raving about a couple of the other picks in the class. But to add some context to what you're saying about Jalen Jones, the Colts 7th-round pick, 19 targets last season. Just 19 targets. That's 1 in like every 14 coverage snaps for him. He was actually targeted last year, so very few targets, very Rock Ya-Sin-esque. I'm going to invoke that beautiful name right there for you guys listening. But Adi, man, from Northwestern, I'm calling him Adi. I think it's more fun. I've had some pushback on that from
I like it. I like it.
Yeah. Adi, Northwestern. I love this fit in Indy because, like you said, some teams were scared about where you play this guy. Look at Indy, though. They love taking these type of guys. Dio Adangbo, Tyquan Lewis. This is the Chris Ballard mold of pass rusher. And yes, I'm not saying either of those guys have been like perfect hits or they've been 10 sack guys or something like that in the NFL, but keep taking shots at this. Keep taking shots at that type. And, again, with Dio was a phenomenal athlete. Tyquan Lewis was an insanely explosive athlete. Adi is like more athletic. than those guys.
Yeah.
Like 281, 449.
Like, he's
Like,
pretty close to the maximum, right? You
yeah.
know, it's really absurd, and it's exciting to think about the different things you can do with that.
Yeah, and then when you get a scheme like Gus Bradley's scheme where it's so attacking, it's just gap shooting. Like you're basically gap shooting, and they're now bringing in guys who can kind of do that gap shooting. You know, Samson Ebukam, they got from the 49ers who can do the gap shooting. Taven Bryan, where that's the only thing he can do
Yeah.
is gap shoot. He can't do anything else. Another freak athlete though, and then Adi just mixed in there as well, along with Dio Dangbo, Taekwon Lewis. Look, the Colts pass rush might not be amazing this next season, but they're going to be explosive and they're going to make offensive linemen freaked out about these gaps every single time next season. But another draft pick I want to ask you about, because I know opinions on him were kind of all over the place. Some people had him as a first round prospect. Others had him as more of a day 3 guy because of his size. But Josh Downs in round 3, where did you fall on Josh Downs in this draft class?
Yeah, so I loved that value. I had him as a top 30 player, I want to say maybe top 35, but I was a big fan. I think the size is definitely going to be the biggest question for him, around 171, right? So 5'9", 171, not one of the biggest guys, and that's going to be, difficult for him. But I think especially for the Colts who have size on the boundaries with Michael Pittman Jr., Alec Pierce, I think there's an avenue for him to go to the slot right away.
Yeah.
And I think especially for Josh Downs, whenever a guy is an outlier, whether it's size, athleticism, any trait, you ask if they have other traits to counteract that and compensate for that. And I think Josh Downs certainly does. He's very explosive. That's one thing that really stands out on his tape. The athleticism is not an issue. Not only explosive, but flexible as a route runner too, can carry that acceleration through transitions, right? He's got enough speed to threaten vertically, but he's also very flexible, very nuanced when it comes to using his spacing to manipulate defensive backs.
Yeah.
And that's very important for me. I think there's a lot of ways you can use him with that right away. And then on top of that too, for a smaller receiver, very consistent at converting at the catch point, right? I think he had one of the highest contested catch rates this past year. He's a guy who's very coordinated when it comes to reaching beyond his frame and kind of hands catching, securing the ball with his hands and not letting it get into his body. So I think when you look at all that, he attacks the football for his size. I think all of that really culminates to a very complete profile with that size, right? I think, and then he's a really good rack threat too. At North Carolina, they could use him in motion, give him the ball on little drag routes and mesh routes and let him go to work in space, right? He's got the burst to do that. So, I think there's an avenue for him to be a very, very good playmaker. And I think he complements what the Colts have perfectly right now. So, I'm excited to see. I think that was one of the better QB wide receiver pairings for me, getting him and Anthony Richardson. That's an explosive combination. And when you have a lot of size to work off of too, it's fun to think about. My comp for him was Doug Baldwin. I think he's got the same explosive athleticism, not quite top end speed. They're both kind of high 4.4, low 4.5, but a guy who can attack space, can separate with that combined nuance and athleticism, and then a guy who, for his size, actually attacks the football, converts very well at the catch point. I think you're working with a lot of good things with Josh Downs.
Yeah, for sure. I'm really excited about his fit. And just, again, Shane Steichen, you're going to have an offense that is so predicated on 3x1 sets, bunch sets, empty personnel. You need a weapon like this. You need your quick winner, a guy who can win really easily on either on the backside or as the innermost receiver on these sets, but also, like you mentioned there on like the mesh concepts and stuff like that. If you're running bunch, you need to have that receiver who can just slip under the bunch and has that explosiveness and the quickness to create after the catch. I'm really excited for his fit in this team with this team, especially again, you have the trees on the outside. You even have the tree in Jelani Woods on the middle as well. Adding a Josh Downs to that, along with obviously this unicorn of a quarterback, I think it's going to be a really great fit. But coming up, guys, we're going to talk about some undrafted free agents. Yes, Ian has also watched some of these undrafted free agents. I told you he's a wealth of knowledge. We're going to talk about these undrafted free agents coming up in just a second. All right, guys. So we're talking undrafted free agents. The Colts, I think now, because they missed it one season, I think it's been, I want to say it's like 24 of the last 25 years they've had an undrafted free agent make the roster. I think it's 24 of 25. You guys can correct me if I'm wrong. Definitely call me out on Twitter if that is wrong, but it's something like that. They've missed it once in the last 20-something years. I think there's a good chance this season, though, that they continue that trend of undrafted free agents making the team. And obviously the main one is Emil Kior Jr., guard out of Alabama. Ian, this was a guy that consensus wise, this was like a top 150, top 200 guy who slipped to the undrafted free agent range. Why do you think teams kind of passed on him? And do you think he has a good chance of making a roster in Indy where, a guard, it's kind of wide open?
Yeah, and that was the first thing that stood out to me when I was looking at the undrafted free agent class and like where guys have the best chance to break onto the roster. Like their interior depth is fairly wide open. I think it's one
Yeah.
of those things where they have guys, but there's not a lot solidified there. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ryan Kelly, what's his long term situation looking like too?
Yeah, we don't know because there was rumors about him being traded potentially this offseason.
Hmm.
I think he's got 2 years left on his deal. They were kind of talking about it a little bit. So, like, I think he'll be here this next season.
Hmm.
It seems like that's for sure, and we'll see kind of how where that goes. But I love that you brought that up because yeah, we don't know what his long term situation is and if he's going to be the center of 2024, 2025 for this team.
Yeah, because like I remember there were trade rumors, right? Nothing really came of it at the time, but it's one of those things where it's still kind of lingering there. Like, how long is this guy going to be here? And it's one of those things. Ideally, you're not in a position where an undrafted free agent has to be relied on to compensate for that, right? But it is something to watch. And Emil Ekiyor for me was the top 200 prospect. I thought he was safely draftable. That's the thing with the draft, man. I mean, once you get into that day 3 range, it really is up to the individual team's board, and you see a lot of players fall who in the media are very much worth the pick just because other teams, I mean, first off, teams have way bigger staffs. They have a
Yeah.
lot of room to differentiate and kind of vary, across the board, a lot more reach, right? So, maybe there's a guy from like Southwest Oklahoma State that you didn't get a chance to watch that this one team really likes. So it's one of those things where once you get to day 3, the variability is much higher and good players go undrafted every year. They do. I think Emil Ekiyor is a solid player. I think the build for me is the most exciting thing. Around 6'2" and a half, I want to say 314 pounds, near 34-inch arms, 33, 34. So, whenever I look for trench players, I'm partial to guys who have that combination of natural leverage and proportional length. Natural leverage is just a safe way of saying he's a little shorter, right? But hey, short kings unite, right? But I think yeah, football is a game of leverage. It's a game of pad level. You got to be able to get under guys too, but then also having the longer arms to make contact first to drive more power. I think that's very valuable. And on Ekiyor's tape, that shows up as a strength where he can really get under guys. He can drive through, channel that power with his lower body as well. He's got pretty good anchor strength as well. I think he's a decent athlete too. Maybe not elite, but I think the straight line burst into contact is a strength of his. And then at the same time, physical finisher, right? I think his profile, that size profile that I mentioned, he played at guard, but there was some talk among evaluators this cycle that he could maybe be a candidate to move inside to center too.
Yep.
So I think, looking ahead to the future, he could be a guy who you look at in that depth wing for the Colts and it's like, hey, if we need to play him a guard, he can. But if we need him to slide to center, he could potentially do that too. I think having that versatility, whenever you're a team and you're making those roster decisions, how can we coalesce it from 2 players to 1 in this spot? Get a guy who can play guard and center. That roster efficiency, I think, could be an added bonus for him down the line.
Yeah, for sure. I still think the Colts are a candidate to add a free agent at right guard. Obviously a Dalton Reisner type could be added in there, but as of right now, I think he has a good chance competing with Will Fries to be the starting right guard, which is crazy to think of an undrafted free agent. Who knows what the Colts ultimately do too? They might put Blake Freeland at left tackle and Bernard Ryman at right guard. Like there are a lot of different options here for the Indianapolis Colts. But I really like this guy's fit with the team. And yeah, I think long-term or short-term, he could be the right guard this next season. So we'll see what happens there. Some other undrafted free agents, some notable ones that I enjoyed on film. Cody Crest from Sam Houston State. I really think he should have been drafted. I really enjoyed his film. I think he kind of looks like the FCS version of Alec Pierce on film, where it's like everything's like a go ball to
Yeah.
him, like a lot of go balls and a lot of just like one-on-one, but you see the speed, you see the explosion on film, and you could see him go up and get it. I remember just watching him just the other day and I was like, oh, that's just another Alec Pierce. Great. Awesome. I love me some Alec Pierce there. But what do you think of Cody Crest on film?
Yeah, I mean, kind of what you mentioned, right? I mean, he's a vertical guy, but I mean, we talked about what Shane Steichen's offense is. It's vertical, very vertically oriented. I think having a guy like Cody Crest who can, convert on that. He's a little smaller than Pierce for sure. I think he measured in at 6'198". I want to say, slightly under 31-inch arms. So he's kind of wiry but compact too. But I think 4.38 speed, which that's legit, and especially the FCS, that really stands out. Being able to threaten defenses vertically, but then also converted the catch point too, track the ball downfield, kind of convert in that phase. So yeah, I think the speed is the biggest thing with him. But then also I think he had a 6'7", 7'3" cone too. So he's got the agility in that toolbox too is very exciting. 38-inch vertical, right? So anytime, I love to isolate those wide receivers with those kinds of physical tools, especially in the UDFA pool. Because especially if you can get him into an offensive fit like this, where like, hey, if he does make the roster and if he does get some rotational reps, simply having that speed to threaten down the field can be very valuable.
Yeah, I love him as like a Kez Watkins type guy in
Mhm.
Shane Steichen's offense. Just what he was doing, just long over routes, occasional deep shots, maybe only 15 to 20 targets a season, but that's all you need. That's all you need to make something happen.
Yeah.
I think that's more of a long-term fit. Obviously, again, an FCS guy, undrafted free agent, has a journey to make the roster, but I was impressed on film.
And
I
ideally,
love
that
those
speed
types,
too, especially for undrafted guys, being able to make an impact as a special teamer, right? If you have
right?
4.38 speed, get down the field quickly as a gunner, that can really help your chances.
Yeah, for sure. We have a great one in Ashton Doolin here currently on the roster, and having another one like Cody Crest could certainly help. Last undrafted free agent I wanted to talk to you about is Liam Anderson from Holy Cross. I know a lot of people don't know this name because he wasn't on a bunch of like mock draft simulators or anything like that. But I was told early in the offseason that the Colts like Liam Anderson, so I watched a couple of his games, and I get a very like Forrest Ryan type of prospect in my head. I get like Forrest Ryan, JoJo Doman type. Like this is going to be a good special teamer, from day one. And he didn't really do too much of it in college, but I really enjoyed watching his film. I think there's some good playmaking ability there with Liam Anderson. What are your thoughts on Liam Anderson from Holy Cross, though, Ian?
Yeah, I didn't get to watch as much as him as I wanted to. Like it's more that I have an awareness of him, unfortunately. So
Mhm.
that's kind of where my scope ends. But I remember he had very good size. I want to say, I
Yeah,
want to say he was listed at 6'3", 230. A guy who was a tackling machine for sure. I think just having that size alone is very valuable. But again, I didn't watch as much of him as I wanted to. But that Holy Cross defense, I wanted to get around to it more because they got John Smith, a corner that I liked as well. But
yeah.
yeah, I know the size has been the biggest part of his appeal.
Yeah, size. He's got some decent speed as well. Again, just a special teamer, but special teams matters.
I wanna
Special
look up
teams matters.
his pro day results now, hang on.
Yeah. Okay. I'll
Uh,
keep talking while you're looking it up. But yeah,
I
no,
wanna
Liam
see.
Anderson from Holy Cross. Again, I was told earlier in the offseason this was a guy where the Colts were really looking at him. They kind of viewed him in that Forrest Ryan type role that they had last season.
Mhm.
Again, just a camp body guy who comes in and works hard and maybe makes a little bit of noise. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's how the Colts viewed him.
Yeah, here we go, 6'3", 226, 4.55 speed. That'll play. That'll play
There we
right
go.
there. Yeah,
There we
that's
go.
good. 33.5 inch, 10.8 broad. No, yeah, 10.8. That's him. 10.8. So very good explosiveness too. 29 and 3/8 arms though. So or
Oh,
2/8 arms. So the proportional. He's like a T-Rex out there. But he's again the range, the tackling ability, the size. Again, like I said, yeah, like you said. I mean, there's a role for him for sure. And I think especially when you're an undrafted free agent, breaking in with that special teams ability can be really big.
yeah, for sure. I know we're talking undrafted free agents, but I did want to ask you about one more draft pick that we kind of ran out of time in the last segment, though. And this is a guy where I'm weirdly too excited about him because I just watched some of his film and I'm like, I know he's older, but like, this is a freak athlete. It's Daniel
Daniel
Scott.
Scott, yeah.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, man. I was watching some of his film and I guess I feel wrong saying this, but he was my favorite watch of their day 3 picks. And I love Darius Rush. Like Darius Rush is a
Yeah.
blast on film. But Daniel Scott, the couple flashes, I was like, oh man, like this could be really good. What do you think about Daniel Scott?
Yeah, it's one of those things where, especially in this class, right? Just watching the safeties was really weird because there's so
Yeah.
many niche guys who are, primarily slot defenders, right? Or attacking box safeties. And Daniel Scott comes along and he's a guy who's playing too high, playing single high, and he can come into the slot and play off man and mirror guys. He's shown that he can do that, but he shows legitimate range when he turns his hips and runs, man. I think the reaction to stimulus for him is very appealing. Another guy who's pretty rocked up. I think he's like 6'2", over 200 pounds, man. So he's big, he's strong. And then the way that he moves is just so fluid, so effortless for that size too, man. I was a big fan. When he tested, I was like, I got to get eyes on this guy because the testing numbers were really, really appealing. But he's got range, he's got ball skills, but then very functional in the way that he plays safety as well, managing space, very physical coming downhill. He's willing to tackle, he's active in the contact box. So that was a fun pick for me. I remember that when you brought it up. But yeah, they got him on day 3, and I was like, okay, safety depth, but this is a guy who can play a lot of different roles for you, single high, two high, playing into the box, outside the slot too. I think that versatility is going to be valuable. But yeah, I'm excited to see where he goes, because ultimately having that versatility, especially with Nick Cross out there, I think that's going to be that could be a fun pairing if he ends up getting on the defense.
Yeah, those two plus Rodney Thomas, who was a star last year as well as
Yeah.
a rookie. Like a lot of really good, talented secondary players, a lot of young, talented secondary players here in Indy. But guys, that is all we have for today. Make sure all of you beautiful everydayers tune in again tomorrow when we have the legendary Fran Duffy on to talk about Anthony Richardson. But this was the Ian Cummings episode at IC_draft. I told you guys he's an encyclopedia of knowledge. And my gosh, he definitely showed it on this on this episode here. So make sure you guys are following him on social media. One of the best draft minds out there. And if you don't already, follow us on social medias at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. Also, subscribe to Locked On Colts podcast on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcasts. We'd love your ratings, reviews, and we'll see you guys back here bright and early tomorrow on Wednesday.